So what exactly are loops in programming? Well, loops are a very useful feature in almost every programming language, which enable us in executing a piece of code multiple times. For example, let's say we have a console log statement, and for the sake of simplicity, I will have the hello world statement, and I would like to output this about 10 times. Well, in that case, I will have to do a lot of repetition. The loops in programming, they allow us to basically eliminate this repetition. So in this case, if you notice the pattern, I'm simply executing this one statement 10 times. In this chapter, we will look at the for loop, which is perfect for this scenario. Following is the syntax of the for loop. Whatever we write inside this block of code will be executed multiple times based on these parameters. We will look at them in a second. So for example, if I write console.log hello world, it's going to output hello world 10 times. I can output it 20 times by changing this value, and I can output it 100 times by changing this value to 100. And if I set it to 0, nothing is going to output. If I set it to 1, it outputs it 1 time. So what exactly is going on here? Well, this can be understood much better from the following flowchart. So the flowchart describes the way the loop executes. Loop starts, the variable I is created and it's initialized to a value of 0. And then it goes on to this diamond symbol. And the diamond symbol basically represents a condition. And then it moves on to checking the condition. It checks if I is less than 10. If I is less than 10, then it basically executes the code block, and after executing the code block, it increments the value of I by 1. So the new value of I now would be 1. It then goes back into checking the condition. If the condition is still true, it's going to execute the code block once again, and it's going to increment the value of I once again. The new value of I will be 2. And once again, it will go back to checking the condition. Since 2 is less than 10, it's going to execute the code block once again. And it goes on till the value of I reaches 10. When the value of I reaches 10, the condition becomes false, and that is where the loop ends. So that's essentially what's happening inside the code as well. We define a new variable. This is the condition which is checked after every iteration. This is what happens after the code block is executed. So the general syntax of writing a for loop is the following. So it's the for keyword followed by initialization inside the brackets, then the condition, and then an expression which defines some operation. What you're seeing over here is the most typical and common method of writing a for loop. And if you just understand this method, this is sufficient for the current level. But obviously we can do much more flexible things with it. For example, I can define a variable and I can initialize it at the value 5, and I can define a condition that while I is greater than 0, it should keep executing, and I can decrement the value of I. And if I use the console.log statement here, just write hello, I'm going to comment out the above for loop. So just try to think what happens. Well, it initializes the value of I to 5. 5 is greater than 0, so the condition is true. Since it's true, it's going to execute the code block, and then it's going to set it to 4. And it will go on till it becomes 0. So this is going to execute 5 times. If I run this, you will see hello 5 times. And similarly, if I set it to 10, it's going to execute 10 times. Now obviously this is a more difficult method of understanding it, because this is not a very intuitive way of writing that we want the loop to execute 10 times, but this was just to show how flexible for loops are. However, this is generally not recommended. The recommended method is to follow the conventions, so that if someone else is reading your code, they have an easier time understanding it as well. And this is the most common method of executing some code a specific number of times, and you will see it in many places. One more thing to note is that since we are defining a variable here, You might be wondering, what is the scope of this variable? Well, the scope of this variable is basically the for loop itself. So we can access this variable I here, and this is going to give you a very good idea of what exactly is happening to the value of I. So it starts from 0 and it goes up till 9. It's important to note that the value 10 is not outputted here, because when the value is 10, the loop no longer executes further, as shown in the flowchart as well. So let's create a small application of a for loop to understand this better. So imagine I want to create a function which sums the numbers up to a specific point. For example, I can just have a parameter number, and it's going to return the sum of all the numbers starting from 1 up till that number. So for example, if I put sum up to 5, it should return 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, which will be equal to 15. So as a result, this should return 15, and the same operation should be performed if we do 10 or any other number. So how can we do that? Well, for that we can use loops. So I'm going to create a for loop. Let I is equal to 1 in this case, because we want to start from 1. While I is less than number I plus plus. Now here's a small problem in the condition, which we will see in a bit. And I want to store the result into a variable, because that's the only way we can keep adding up the values. So I'll create a new variable called result, and I'll set it to 0. And in every cycle or every iteration, I'm going to add the value of I to the result, and then finally I'm going to return result. And if I run this, in fact, let me use console.log to output the result as well. If I run this, it's going to output 10 instead of 15. What's really happening here? Well, as we saw before, it's actually going up till 4, and it's not really executing the block of code when the value of I reaches 5. This is because the condition becomes false when the value of I is equal to 5, because 5 less than 5 will be false, and therefore this will not be added to the result. So how can we fix that? Since it's a condition, we have a lot of flexibility. There are multiple ways to do it. One of the most straightforward ways would be to check if I is less or equal to number, and this way only when I is greater than number, then it's going to stop. So if I run this, it outputs 15. And same is the case if we do 100, it's going to quickly output 50-50. So as you can see, for loops are extremely useful because they let us perform a lot of computation very quickly by repeating a specific set of lines of code as many times as we want.